It's 3 in the morning, the house is completely quiet, and you're staring at the ceiling running the same numbers over and over in your head. Not because you enjoy math, but because your brain won't let you rest. Somewhere between the glow of the streetlight outside and the sound of your own breathing, one question keeps looping. Am I doing the right thing with my money, or am I quietly screwing up my future? You're not thinking about luxury or early retirement or beating the market. You're thinking about the mortgage sitting on your chest like a weight. 300,000, maybe 500,000. A number so big it doesn't even feel real until the payment leaves your account every single month. And at the same time, you can't escape the noise. Friends from college casually mentioning their index funds. Headlines about the stock market always going up in the long run. Podcasts telling you that every extra dollar should be invested or you're falling behind. That tension right there, between the safety of paying down debt and the fear of missing out on growth, is what keeps people awake at night. And here's the part most videos never admit. This isn't really a math problem. It looks like a spreadsheet problem, but it's actually a stress problem, a sleep problem, a control problem. By the end of this, I want to walk you through the exact same decision millions of Americans are facing right now, with real numbers and real trade-offs, and show you the one mistake that causes people to regret their choice years later, even when they technically did the math right. Most people think this question starts with interest rates or expected returns, but it actually starts much earlier in a much quieter place. It starts with pressure, the kind you don't post about, the kind that builds slowly when you sign a 30-year mortgage and suddenly realize your life has a fixed monthly obligation attached to it. Every month, no matter how you feel about your job, no matter what the market is doing, that payment is due. And psychologically, that changes the way you see money. At the same time, you're surrounded by a completely different narrative. Scroll your phone for 5 minutes and you'll see someone talking about compound interest, someone else showing a chart that goes up and to the right, and another voice telling you that if you're not investing aggressively, you're wasting time. So you're caught in the middle. On one side, responsibility, stability, the quiet relief of reducing a massive debt. On the other side, opportunity, growth, the fear that playing it safe today might cost you freedom tomorrow. This is why the question feels so heavy, because it's not really about maximizing dollars. It's about which regret you're more afraid of living with. The regret of seeing a big mortgage balance 10 years from now and wishing you had attacked it harder, or the regret of opening an investment account later in life and realizing you missed out on years of compounding. And here's what makes it worse. Both sides have solid arguments, smart people on each side, and plenty of math to back them up, which means doing nothing feels irresponsible, but doing the wrong thing feels dangerous. That tension is the real problem we're solving here. And to understand it properly, we need to ground this in a very real, very ordinary American situation that looks a lot like what many people are living through right now. Let's make this concrete, because abstract advice is useless when your bank account is real. Picture a home that costs $500,000, financed with a standard 30-year fixed mortgage at 7%, which is right in line with where rates have been sitting for a lot of Americans lately. Your monthly payment comes out to about $3,300, and that's before property taxes, insurance, or any HOA fees. This is just principal and interest, the clean version people like to quote. On paper, it looks manageable. You budget around it, you adjust your lifestyle, and after a year or so, it starts to feel normal. Then something good happens. Maybe you get a promotion. Maybe your partner's income goes up. Maybe expenses finally stabilize. Suddenly, there's an extra $1,000 a month that didn't exist before. Not a bonus, not a windfall, but real, recurring cash flow. And that's when the question stops being theoretical. That extra $1,000 has to go somewhere. You can send it straight to the bank, watching your loan balance inch down faster, or you can send it into the market, letting it chase growth while your mortgage quietly runs in the background. Both options feel responsible. Both feel defensible. And that's what makes this so hard. Because this isn't about reckless spending versus discipline. It's about choosing between two different versions of being smart with your money. One version prioritizes certainty and reduction of risk. The other prioritizes opportunity and long-term growth. To understand what each path really leads to, we need to walk through them one at a time, starting with the option most people are instinctively drawn to when they hear words like compound interest and financial independence. So let's follow that instinct and see where it actually leads. In this first scenario, you decide not to touch the mortgage any faster than required and instead put that extra $1,000 to work in the market every single month. You automate it because discipline matters, and you start investing in a broad, low-cost, total market index fund right after your first year of payments. Historically, the U.S. stock market has returned about 10% annually over long periods. But to stay grounded in reality, let's be a little conservative and assume a 9% return to account for fees, taxes, and the fact that markets don't move in straight lines. Some years will feel incredible, others will feel brutal, but over time the average smooths out. As your career progresses, your income grows, and you increase that monthly investment by about 3% a year to keep pace with raises and cost of living adjustments. This isn't aggressive or unrealistic. It's what naturally happens for many professionals over a long career. Now stretch this out over 29 years, the remaining life of your mortgage after that first year, and something remarkable happens. That steady $1,000 habit quietly compounds into roughly $1.8 million. Not on paper, not hypothetically, real money. The kind of number that changes how retirement looks, how work feels, and how much margin you have in your life. At this point, it feels like the case is closed. Why rush to pay down a loan when investing the same money could build a 7-figure portfolio in the background? This is where most calculators stop and most advice ends, confidently declaring that investing wins. But there's a problem hiding under this conclusion, something subtle that almost nobody thinks about when they run these numbers for the first time. And before we compare anything else, you need to understand how your mortgage is actually behaving while all of this investing is happening, because the reality of that loan looks very different from what most people assume. Here's the part that catches almost everyone off guard the first time they see it. Imagine your $500,000 mortgage broken into 10 equal blocks, each one representing $50,000 of debt. After a full year of payments, you've sent the bank nearly $40,000. Instinctively, it feels like you should have knocked out at least one of those blocks. But that's not what happens. In reality, after 12 months, your loan balance has barely moved. You've reduced the principal by roughly $4,000. The other $35,000 didn't disappear, and it didn't build equity. It went straight to interest. This is amortization, and it's how almost every mortgage in America is structured. In the early years, the vast majority of your payment isn't buying you ownership. It's buying the bank time. In the very first month, about 88% of your payment goes to interest, and only 12% actually reduces what you owe. Even after several years, the balance still tilts heavily in the bank's favor. For nearly 2 decades, you're paying mostly interest, while the principal crawls down inch by inch. This isn't a trick or a scam, it's just the math of long-term loans, but emotionally it feels very different once you see it laid out. It explains why so many people feel like they're running in place despite making every payment on time. And once this reality sinks in, the idea of sending extra money directly to the principal starts to feel less like a conservative move and more like a form of quiet rebellion. Because unlike your regular payment, every extra dollar you send doesn't get diluted by interest. It goes straight to reducing the debt immediately and permanently. That realization is what pushes many people toward the second path, the one focused on aggressively paying the mortgage down and reclaiming control sooner rather than later. Once you see how the loan actually works, this second option starts to feel almost irresistible. In this scenario, you take that same extra $1,000 a month and apply it directly to your mortgage as an additional principal payment, starting in the second year and increasing it by about 3% annually as your income grows. The key difference here is simple but powerful. Every single dollar goes straight to the balance. There's no waiting, no averaging, no hoping the market cooperates. When you reduce the principal, You permanently shrink the amount the bank can charge you interest on going forward. Run the numbers on a $500,000 mortgage at 7% with this kind of consistent prepayment, and the results are dramatic. A loan that was supposed to last 30 years is gone in a little over 16. Nearly 14 years of payments simply disappear. Even more striking is what happens to the total interest. Instead of paying close to $700,000 to the bank over 3 decades, you end up paying closer to $300,000. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars you never send out the door. And emotionally, something shifts the moment you realize there's an end date you can actually see. The mortgage stops feeling like a life sentence and starts feeling like a countdown. This is where a lot of personal finance advice plants its flag and declares victory. Pay off the house early, save a massive amount of interest, sleep better at night, and to be fair, that argument has real weight behind it. But stopping here would give you a dangerously incomplete picture. Because while you're celebrating the interest saved, you also need to account for what it actually cost you to get there, and what that money could have become if it had been put to work elsewhere. Until you compare the full trade-off, it's too easy to draw the wrong conclusion. When you put both paths on the table at the same time, the comparison gets uncomfortable fast. On the surface, prepaying looks like a massive win because the interest savings are so visible. But those savings didn't come out of thin air. To achieve them, you committed to making extra payments month after month, year after year. When you add up all those additional $1,000 payments, gradually increasing with income, you end up spending roughly $238,000 out of pocket to kill the loan early. Yes, you saved about $380,000 in interest, but the net benefit is closer to $140,000. That's real money, but it's not the whole story. Because on the other side of the ledger sits the investing path, where that same cash flow quietly compounded into something approaching $1.8 million. On paper, the verdict seems obvious. Investing wins by a wide margin, and if all we cared about were final balances at the 30-year mark, we could stop right here and call it a day. But this is exactly where most analyses go wrong. They freeze the comparison at the finish line and ignore what happens along the way. They treat risk as a footnote and assume the journey feels the same no matter which path you choose. It doesn't. And there's one more layer to this decision that completely changes how you should think about it. A factor that has nothing to do with averages or long-term charts. It's a form of risk that doesn't show up in spreadsheets until it's already done damage. And it's the reason two people following the same investing plan can end up with radically different outcomes. To understand why the invest everything answer isn't as clean as it looks, we need to talk about the one risk almost nobody plans for. This is where the conversation usually gets uncomfortable, because it challenges something people want desperately to believe. Over the long run, the stock market has delivered strong average returns, but average is not the same as guaranteed, and the order of those returns matters far more than most people realize. This is what's known as sequence of returns risk, and it can quietly reshape your entire outcome without you doing anything wrong. Imagine two people investing the exact same amount for the exact same length of time. One starts right before a major downturn, the other starts right after. The market averages out over decades, but their personal experience doesn't. Someone who began investing in late 2007, faithfully putting money in month after month through the financial crisis, saw years of effort produce surprisingly modest results over the next several years. Meanwhile, someone who started at the bottom in 2009 experienced explosive growth over the same time span. Same market, same behavior, completely different outcomes, purely because of timing. And here's the crucial contrast. When you put an extra dollar toward a 7% mortgage, you are locking in a guaranteed 7% return. There is no volatility, no bad year, no sequence risk. The math doesn't change because of headlines or recessions. That certainty has real value, especially in a world where safe returns are hard to find. A guaranteed 7% competes surprisingly well once you factor in risk, taxes, and the emotional toll of market swings. This is why the decision isn't simply about maximizing dollars. It's about deciding how much uncertainty you're willing to carry while you're trying to build your future. And once you frame it that way, the question shifts from which one wins to something much more personal. At a certain point, the numbers stop feeling abstract and start showing up in your body, in how you sleep, in how tight your chest feels when the market drops, in how you react when another bill hits your inbox. This is the part of the conversation that spreadsheets can't capture. Some people genuinely feel calm knowing their money is invested, even when it swings wildly, because they trust the long-term story. Others feel a constant low-level anxiety carrying a large balance of debt, even when that debt is considered good on paper. Walk two people into the same house with the same mortgage, and you'll hear two completely different internal monologues. One thinks, this is stability. This is progress. The other thinks, this is a chain. This is pressure. Neither of them is wrong. They're optimizing for different things. One is optimizing for maximum future wealth, the other for present peace of mind. And the mistake people make is assuming there's one universal answer that should work for everyone. A strategy that looks optimal on paper can be miserable to live with if it clashes with how you're wired. If your debt keeps you up at night, investing aggressively while the balance barely moves can feel like torture, no matter how strong the long-term projections look. On the flip side, if liquidity and flexibility matter deeply to you, pouring every spare dollar into home equity can feel like burying options inside the walls of your house. This is the moment where the conversation has to move beyond what earns the highest return and toward what kind of life are you actually trying to build. And once you ask that question honestly, a more balanced framework starts to make sense. This is where the false choice finally breaks down. You don't actually have to pick a side and hope you guessed right. The F2 rule, what I call the freedom fund rule, is built on a much simpler idea. You split your extra money between building future wealth and buying present-day peace. One hand invests, the other reduces debt. Not because it's mathematically perfect, but because it's psychologically sustainable. Think of it like walking with one foot on solid ground and one foot on a moving escalator. The ground gives you stability, the escalator gives you momentum. Together, they move you forward without tipping you over. In practice, this can look a few different ways. Some people lean 60% toward investing and 40% toward prepayment, letting growth do most of the work while still making visible progress on the loan. Others prefer a clean 50-50 split, a balanced approach that keeps both goals moving at the same time. As life changes, the balance can change too. Younger households with decades ahead of them might tilt heavier toward investing, while those approaching retirement often find more comfort shifting the weight toward paying the house off. Interest rates matter here as well. When your mortgage rate creeps higher, the guaranteed return of prepayment becomes more attractive. When rates are low, investing tends to take the lead. The point of the F2 rule isn't precision, it's alignment. It gives you a way to move forward without constantly second-guessing yourself every time the market moves or a new headline appears. And when the mortgage eventually disappears, something powerful happens. Your cash flow opens up, and the game changes again. When the mortgage finally reaches zero, the conversation doesn't end. It shifts. The money that used to disappear into a payment every month doesn't vanish. It gets reassigned. Suddenly, you're no longer choosing between investing and prepaying. You're choosing how to deploy a much larger stream of cash with far more flexibility. This is where early prepayment quietly changes the emotional trajectory of your finances. Investing after the mortgage is gone feels different. There's less pressure, less urgency, and often a greater willingness to stay the course during market downturns because your baseline expenses are lower. At the same time, this doesn't mean prepaying is always the right first move. If your job is unstable, liquidity matters. If you don't have an emergency fund covering 6 to 12 months of expenses, that needs to come first. If you're missing out on employer retirement matches or tax-advantaged accounts, you're leaving guaranteed benefits on the table. Context matters more than rules. High-interest debt above 10% should almost always be eliminated before worrying about mortgages or markets. Approaching retirement changes the equation as well because a paid-off home dramatically reduces how much income you need later in life. The same strategy that makes sense at 35 can be a poor fit at 55. This is why rigid advice fails so often. Life isn't static, and your financial strategy shouldn't be either. Once you accept that, the final piece of this puzzle becomes less about optimization and more about intention. At some point, you have to stop asking what the spreadsheet says and start asking what you want your days to feel like. Financial freedom isn't a number, it's a relationship with money. For some people, freedom means waking up without the weight of debt hanging overhead, even if it costs a bit of upside. For others, freedom means knowing their money is liquid, growing, and available for opportunities that haven't appeared yet. The mistake isn't choosing one path over the other. The mistake is drifting into a decision without realizing what you're optimizing for. Before you open another calculator or investment app, take a moment and define what freedom actually means to you. Not what a guru says it should mean, and not what worked for someone else in a completely different situation. Once that answer is clear, the math becomes supportive instead of overwhelming. Maybe you decide to go all in on investing and accept the volatility. That's a valid choice. Maybe you decide that peace of mind is worth more than chasing maximum returns and you attack the mortgage aggressively. That's valid too. There is no single right answer, only an intentional one. As long as you're making the choice with open eyes, aligned with your values and your tolerance for risk, you're not behind and you're not failing. You're building a financial life that actually fits you. And if you're still wrestling with where to send that extra $1,000 this month, you're not alone. Even after all the math, it's a question worth revisiting because personal finance stays personal, no matter how much you learn.